Hi, everybody. Teresa Aker here from Success Diaries with Teresa Aker. Are you interested in the paranormal? I am. And I have an amazing guest today. His name's John Olsen. He's an author of many, many books about the paranormal. And I'm thrilled that you're here today, John. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is really exciting. Thank you.
My pleasure. I'm thrilled you're here. There's so many questions I have about the paranormal, so I know you're going to answer them all.
Uh,
I'm just going to give everyone just a quick bio about you, John, because you are an author and you're very well written. Just a moment here, and I'm just going to pull up your bio. And so John Olsen lives in Wellsville, Utah in beautiful Cache Valley with his lovely wife, Annie. So he has been collecting true paranormal stories and studying the paranormal since his childhood experiences growing up in his haunted house, which I find really interesting. So I can't wait to hear about that. So John has spent 30 plus years interviewing, investigating, and searching out paranormal stories. He's written a number of books, and his last book, Stranger Utah, is the eighth in the Bridgerland book series. And John's next book, Stranger Idaho, is set for an August 2025 release. So we're definitely want to have you back for the next one, John.
That'll be
So let's
great.
let's talk about you. Let's talk about your stories.
Yeah, so it was very interesting. The home that I grew up in was built in 1883, which in this part of the country is really old. The valley I live in, which is called Cache Valley, is actually some of the first buildings were just in 1860, and after the pioneers came west. So it was a very old home. It was 100 years old when I was a kid. And I had experiences with full body apparition that we actually called him the man in the hat because was a tall farmer with a white shirt, overalls, and a big cowboy hat. And so we called him the man in the hat, us when we were kids. I have an older sister and a younger brother, and we had other experiences with footsteps on the stairs, with things moving. Uh, there is one ghost that loved to play pranks. For example, when I was little, I remember quite a bit being off playing and have my mom call me to the kitchen, only to get there and realize my mother wasn't in the kitchen, and then I'd have to find her, and she'd say, "No, I didn't call you."
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so there was a lot of experiences when I was younger, growing up. And as I got older, my parents didn't like us talking about it outside of the home, just for fear of people thinking we were weird. And when you grow up in a small town, the two things that people love to do is gossip and avoid being gossip. So
That's true.
that's so we couldn't talk about it outside the home. So I studied it all I could. But by the time I was in high school, I had friends who had experiences in my home. And I had to finally admit, yeah, I grew up in a haunted house, and I started telling my stories. I'd be at parties, and one of my friends would be, "Oh, John grew up in a haunted house. Have him tell some stories." And, before long, people brought me their stories. I started hunting down the stories. And then finally, later on in life, after I wrote my first book and got my website, now people come to me from all over and share their story with me. So it's been quite a journey.
Oh my goodness, it's exciting. We first talked last week, we were talking about your stories, and I was excited to be able to bring it to people. So many people have had, whether it be visions or they've had feelings that somebody's in the house and they don't see anything, but they get that eerie feeling. I certainly have had it. They go to soothsayers to find out things if their spirit families or members that they love are trying to reach out to them. So I think everybody kind of feels like there's something more, right? So stories like
Yeah.
yours kind of bring it to the front where people can say, I had that too. So I'm
Mm.
kind of glad you brought it forward. Now, the home that you were brought up in, now, do you still have that home? I'm thinking that you probably moved on, or are you still with the childhood home?
So I have moved on. I have my own home, but my parents still live in the house.
Oh, wow.
And actually, my dad does. Both right now, both my parents are on hospice, and so we spend a lot of time there to help my parents. But the activity has never really stopped. In fact, with both my parents being on hospice, I've learned quite a bit in the fact that the veil, I guess you could call it, kind of
Yes.
thins for them as well. And therefore, quite a while, I would go over and see my mom and dad, and I'd ask if anybody visited, and my dad would be like, my dad came and visited us the other day, and I would be like, I'm like, Grandpa's been gone for like 27 years, and he goes, I know,
Right.
but they still come and see us now, so which is
Isn't it?
very interesting. So
Oh my goodness, that's exciting actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, and it's fascinating too because growing up, um, my mother is actually from Denmark. She was an immigrant to the country, and her mom and dad would come. Her mom would come every summer. Her dad came, so my grandpa would come every other summer. And we never drank coffee in the house, but my grandpa was a huge coffee drinker. And so during the summer, you would know, well, grandpa's here because you could smell the coffee brewing.
Oh, that's
But
interesting, John.
yeah, and so now there's times when I go over to see my parents, or since my grandpa passed away a long time ago, and we all know that he's been there to see them or is because you'll get hit with that smell of coffee just really strong, that same exact kind of way he had it. And it's been interesting how many times ghosts will let you know they're there by smells, which is fascinating to me.
I've heard that before, or colognes or things. I have absolutely heard. There's a number of, I know been some books on signs that your
Mhm.
loved ones are around, and that's certainly one of the big ones, the aura factor of the smells, and then also feathers and coins appearing out of nowhere, all kinds of things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep,
So
that's
yeah,
that's
I can
so true.
understand the coffee smell. That's this is so exciting. Now, you have to tell us some of the other stories. Some, I know you did a lot of investigating and a lot of searching. I guess because you were in a haunted house yourself, you kind of have the background and then you got interested in investigating this, John?
So it got me really interested in hearing other people's stories and
Sure.
collecting stories and getting out. And in my books, I don't just do ghost stories. I also have Bigfoot stories and UFO stories and glitches in the Matrix. Anything that's really paranormal, I've gone out and interviewed people and talked to them. One of my favorite Bigfoot stories happened here in the valley, actually up the canyon. Um, I interviewed a gentleman, and he was a manager of a lodge up there, and it's so far back into the mountains that the managers would spend 3 days on and then 3 or 4 days off and switch because they had a room there for the managers. And the middle of the night, he only had one couple that was staying there, and they come banging on his door at like 2 o'clock in the morning saying they wanted to leave. And he's like, "Did we do something wrong?" And they're like, "No, we just want to leave." And so he's kind of pressing them, and they said, "Well, we saw something run across the parking lot from our balcony." And he said, "We're in the mountains. There's a lot of things up here." And they said, "Well, this was enormous and it was on 2 feet." And so he checked them out, and they ran to their car and drove off. And so now he's all alone up there. And he went into the office to just put the paperwork in. So he didn't turn the light on. And he went to go put the paperwork down. And behind the desk, so behind him, up high, is a big window, and the shadow from the moon was coming in, and he could see this huge outline of something standing in the window behind him.
Oh my goodness.
And so he just kind of slipped out of the door into the hallway, and he's sitting there wondering, what do I do? And all of a sudden, this enormous creature hit the wall, with both fists, and kind of shook the whole building. And he ran up to his room and was sitting in his room for a good hour trying to figure out what to do. And he
I'd
happened
be
to see
sitting
car,
there too, wondering what to
yeah,
do.
scared, yeah. And he noticed some car lights coming down into the parking lot. So he ran down, and it was the highway patrolman that they usually have one that patrols the canyon. And the patrolman wanted to know if anything strange had happened, and he told him what had happened. And the patrolman said that somebody had complained about somebody in a monkey suit running across the road up there, which was weird because it was the middle of the week and there's not a lot of traffic, so nobody would be playing a prank. But
So now a
uh,
few people had seen it.
exactly. And later on, it was interesting because he asked the owner. He finally got up the courage to tell the owner what had happened, and the owner was quiet for a minute. And then he says, "Do you know how you can tell when they're around?" And he goes, "No." And he says, "If you can't hear the coyotes out yelping, then that means that the Bigfoot are around because the coyotes don't like the Bigfoot." So the owner had known too that there was stuff going on. So
Isn't that something?
yeah, it's
And
interesting.
we've all heard Bigfoot stories, but you know, hear other people have heard them, but now you've
Yeah.
got sort of a documentation of it. That's
Yeah.
kind is that in one of your books too?
Yes, that's in one of my books as well.
Oh,
So, yep.
wonderful.
Yep. So,
Wonder, and now to this day, has there ever been any pictures or anything about this or no?
no, in that area, oddly enough, I've collected several Bigfoot stories from different people
Sure.
that happened in that very area. And none of them knew each other or they didn't even know there were other Bigfoot stories in that area. So it's kind of
Yeah.
collaborates everybody's story that that
Yeah.
area happens to have quite a few of those. So it's
Especially if
interesting.
they don't know each other, John, and they're coming up with the same story all of a sudden in the same time frame. I mean, that's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. So what else can you tell us? What other stories do you have?
So I have a lot of different very strange stories that go on. The one that stands out quite a bit to me, when I first interviewed the gentleman, I really had a hard time believing him because I'd never heard anything like this before. But I'll tell you at the end of the story how it opened up my eyes
Okay.
to a different part. Anyway, he had moved to the valley here. This is again a close one. I have stories from all over the world, but um, he had when he was in his early 20s, he came to visit a friend here in Cache Valley, just fell in love with it and moved here because he was an outdoorsman. He loved hiking and climbing and skiing, and that's all within 10 minutes of anywhere here in the valley. So one fall in August, him and his friend had planned to hike what's called Mount Naomi. It's generally a 1 day hike, but they wanted to stop and spend the night and just enjoy everything. Well, at the last moment, his friend had to cancel, and he decided to go anyway. When you're in your 20s, you're
Yeah.
invincible. And so he did. He hiked up near Mount Naomi, and it was getting dark. And so he just got his bedroll out and had something to eat. There was a fire ban, so he couldn't make a fire, but he had stuff to eat. And then he just laid in his sleeping bag, and he always had an old ratty book that he would bring, one of his old paperback books to just read with a headlamp before he fell asleep. And around 2 o'clock in the morning, he wakes up and he's really kind of confused because he's a really heavy sleeper and it takes a lot to wake him up. So he's trying to figure out what it was that woke him up. And he starts hearing this whistling, coming from his right. Um, and it's not a bird and it's he doesn't recognize it. It's almost like somebody's just whistling at him. And he's trying to find his headlamp and he can't find his headlamp. And then all of a sudden he gets hit in the chest right here with a pebble, not hard, but just kind of like getting your attention kind of thing. And so he slips on his shoes because he's really starting to get freaked out now. And he realizes, oh, my headlamp's still on my head. So he flips his headlamp on and then looks towards where the whistling's coming from. And there's this creature sitting on a little pile of rocks. And it's got green gray skin and it's got very pointy nose, pointy ears, almost just like what you would think of In Harry Potter, when he went to the bank, the Gringotts Bank,
Oh, sure. Okay.
those little creatures that look just like the guys in Harry Potter. He said if it stood up tall, it would maybe be 3 feet tall. And it's sitting on the rock and it's got its hand over its eyes because he's shining the light at it. And it's got handmade kind of old clothing on. And he's in shock. Like he's a very down to earth guy,
Yeah.
never had anything paranormal. And so he's kind of in shock. And he said that he noticed that this thing was trying to hide something behind it. And when he looked, he realized that it had his book in his hand that he'd been reading before he went to bed. So it had been that close enough to steal the book from him. And it kind
Wow.
of snapped him out of it. Yeah. And he just gathered up his stuff and ran for the trail. He fell and just dumped everything. While he's trying to gather things up, the whistling starts right behind him again. So he just gets everything he can and runs down all the way down the mountain to his truck and gets home. I was one of the very few people that he'd actually told that story to because, like I said, he's a very down to earth person. And what's really fascinating is I decided to put it in my book. Um, and I did some research. And first of all, the Native American folklore talks about this creature a lot. That they live in the forest. Back east, they're called Pugwaji. There's a different name out here
Okay.
for it. But what really blew my mind is when I published that book, I had 3 different people email me that said, and one of them, for an example, this woman said, I was reading your book and I dropped it when I read that story because my husband told me that when he was in that area, he was elk hunting in that area and had seen this very same type creature. And I didn't believe my husband and I made fun of him and only to realize somebody else had also seen it. So there's 3 or 4 different people that I've interviewed who have had that very same experience. So it gives credibility to the story. Um,
Right.
and it's one that honestly, even now, I'm like, that's really kind of out there. When it comes to the paranormal, that was really, really out there. But something speaks to me after interviewing so many people. It's amazing, though.
So, what I find interesting, one, you're able to investigate this and you've searched it. So, and you grew up with it. So, you believe in the paranormal, in your opinion, there certainly is,
Hmm.
right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So
And
you,
it's okay if people don't believe in it, that's okay
oh,
too.
sure.
I just yeah.
So you talked about a veil, so we know what that is. Basically, there's something out there that we don't necessarily see all the time. Spirits who go past pass away, and they're on the other side. Okay.
Hmm.
So I've certainly lost people in my lifetime, and I think we all want to believe that there's, something beyond after this. Okay, if that's fair to
Hmm.
say. And
Oh
in my
yes,
opinion,
definitely.
yeah, in my opinion, absolutely. There's got to be something more than just this. That's
Hmm.
just how I feel about it. But what it is, I don't know. I've never had a apparition. But I've certainly had feelings, like the feeling of different things that wash over you. I actually have my husband who passed away actually had about a month after he passed away, which was devastating for me. But I actually smelled his cologne because you were talking about the smells. I
Oh
actually
wow.
did smell his cologne. And I lost my daughter last year.
Hmm.
And about 6 months after that, I was standing in the bathroom. Honestly, I could, a mother knows their child, okay? And it was devastating for me to go through that. And I could smell her. I could smell her this one day just so strong, like she was right there. But I just certainly didn't
Hmm.
see
Hmm.
anybody. I had that smell that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think we probably could, in our own way, read into it. But after saying that, it really did happen and I really did feel that and smell that. So I think we just have to be open-minded and people like you, John, bring it to everyone to give you the kind of, I think, a comfort level that it's okay to think that way, that there are other people who have seen and heard and smelled and touched and know there's something more. I mean, we all know there's soothsayers that talk about the future and the past, but the big thing is spirits that come through.
Mhm.
Okay. I've been to soothsayers. I certainly have. And I've had them say, this was years ago, I've had them predict things, and some happened and some didn't. But it's certainly something to, I don't know, to address in an open-minded way. And so your books are very interesting to me. Let's talk about your most recent book.
Yeah, so my most recent one is Stranger Utah, and it also has all different kinds of stories in there as well, Bigfoot, ghosts. Um, one story that I'll share with you real quick that it's one of my favorite. I keep saying that about all of them, but what I like about this one is the gentleman that I interviewed is actually a professor. So it's somebody in the academic field. He was an anthropologist um, in the 70s when he was still finishing up school. They were working on a dig site for an Anasazi ruins in near the Four Corners of Utah and Colorado and Arizona. And they were working on this site, and strange things started happening. First, if they stayed till dark, they these large orbs would show up, glowing orbs that would basically chase them off of the dig site,
Okay.
and then follow them out. And one night, he was the last one working, and he was cleaning up some stuff, and he started hearing really heavy footsteps around the dig site, and he started getting really nervous. And so he was hurrying back to his vehicle, and he could hear something following him down through there. He finally got to his car and he took off. Well, the next morning, he got a hold of the head archaeologist who's in part of the job site to go with him down there because he wanted to see what was going on. And they went down there, and in the dust and the sand, um, you could see his footprint, his foot tracks coming out of the dig site and heading towards where the car was parked. But there was an enormous wolf track that had followed him down there. And what got really weird was after he had left, the wolf tracks follow him down to the where his car was parked, and then turned and went off into the desert. And so they followed the wolf tracks for a little ways as they went into the desert. And as like right in front of their eyes as they're looking, these enormous wolf tracks changed from wolf tracks down to barefoot human tracks and then
Oh,
kept going off into the desert. And he was like, he kind of, he's like, this is not possible. And
no.
he was trying to talk to the head archaeologist at the time, and he refused to talk about it.
Oh, isn't that
Said, well,
interesting?
we're leaving. But he made a rule from then on. He said, um, nobody's allowed on the site until after the sun has been up for an hour, and everybody has to be out an hour before dusk. And they worked the site that way. So, and what I love about that is, like I said, it was somebody in the field of archaeology that witnessed this and kind of understood it. And so, and it's a really scary
I I
story too, on top
I
of everything
bet,
else.
John.
So,
That's a I actually have goosebumps. I love hearing about stories like that. I think it's just especially when you, as you said, they're adding credibility because he was an archaeologist and he would know. But wow, that's an incredible story to tell us. And that's in the latest book that you have.
yeah, that's in Stranger, Utah. Yep, correct.
Okay, okay. And then now so do you believe in the paranormal, obviously?
Yes, very much
Somewhat?
so.
Yes, okay. So let's talk about your next book. And I'm thinking, John, at that point, we should have you back here if it's up to you, but we'd love to have
Yeah,
you back to talk about your new book. But
yeah.
let's talk about it now. Just give us a quick rundown of what you got coming for us.
Yeah, so my editor, who is also my lovely wife, helps me kind of decide based on um where my stories are, where we kind of want to go with the next book. And so we've chosen Idaho because I have quite a few stories from Idaho, and I've been able to collect quite a few in the last little while as well. And I'm in the process of just finishing up a few of those stories. Um, they're just really amazing stories that I was able to collect about just different spots in Idaho and different things, including there was a story of two gentlemen when they were kids, two brothers that were on a hunting trip that had a boulder thrown at them from a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot.
No
He
way.
obviously was not happy with them being there, and he threw a rock the size of a basketball at these two boys and
Gee,
scared them to death. But
I
um,
bet.
yeah, but yeah, there's just some great stories from Idaho. I have a great connection with Idaho. Where I live, um, I outside of my window, I can see Idaho. That's
Oh, okay. So
how
you're
far north
close.
I am. And
Oh, very good.
yeah, I'm close. Yep. And my wife Annie, um, who I married this year, will be our 10th anniversary. Um,
Congratulations to you and
thank you.
Annie.
Thank you. When we met, she was living in Boise. She's from Houston. So I spent a lot of time while we were dating
Sure.
driving up through there. And my whole youth I spent in the mountains of Idaho as well. So I just have a great affinity for it along with Utah.
Oh, very nice. And Annie, obviously, she's an intricate part of your books and your stories and everything. Has she had experiences?
She really hadn't before we met. When we met, it was interesting because I just collected stories, and I had to after we dated and everything, and I had to admit, yeah, I collect stories, and we talked about it. She was like, she said, "Well, what are you going to do with the stories?" And I said, "Well, I want to write a book someday." And she was like, oh, I'm going to help you. Let's do that now. And she helped me. We got the first one out, and then we've working together been able to get one out every year since.
Oh,
Um,
fantastic.
yeah, and so, but what was interesting, I'll just say real quick. After we first got married, we were moving from one house to another, and our house had sold, but we had about a month before we could move into the next house. So we were going to rent an apartment, but my parents were said you can stay in the upstairs part of our home, which is the home I grew up in.
Yeah.
And she said, well, "What about the ghost?" And I said, "Well, I'll be very verbal. I'll tell them when we're moving in that Annie doesn't like to be scared and leave her alone." So I did. And for the first 3 weeks, nothing happened. And we had a week left, and we were folding clothes together. And she says, I haven't seen any ghosts." And I said, "Well, that's because I told them that you were easily scared and that you didn't want to see them." And kind of jokingly, I just said out loud, I said, "Well, I guess Annie would like to see you now," and she laughed it off. But the very next morning, I got up very early. I had a very early appointment, so I left, and she was lying in bed, and somebody slipped into bed and slipped their arm around her, and she thought it was me that had come back, and then she realized, oh no, John's left. And so she jumps out of bed and turns the light on, and there's an imprint in the bed where somebody was laying in it, and it went away. And then she heard a little laugh going
Oh my
because
goodness.
he loves to play pranks. And for the next week, if she was alone upstairs, whenever she changed her clothes, he would poke her in the side and then laugh or bang the wall. And so after that 1 week, she's like, this place is definitely haunted. So
Oh, that's fantastic.
yeah, she
Oh, that's
kind of regretted
wonderful.
saying, what she did. Yeah.
Yeah, and there
So,
was, it was nice that they were respectful to Annie and not scaring her. And then when she was ready, they appeared. I love that.
yep,
I
they did.
love that.
Yeah.
John,
So
I love the stories today. Now you'll come back on the next one, right? You'll come
I
and
sure
do
will.
the next book. And I know you said in August, so we're going to make sure it's around that time. The books you have now, where can we purchase those?
So they're available on Amazon.
Okay.
It's all under the Stranger Bridgerland book series, and they're all available on either Kindle or paperback or Audible as well. So if you're somebody that likes to listen, you can do that as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Now,
Yeah.
if somebody wants to reach out to you other than purchasing the books and they want to talk to you, what is the best way? I will have your bio
Mhm.
with this, as you know, but what is the best way for them to reach you?
At strangerbridgerland.com is my website, and
Perfect.
that's got all my connections to get a hold of me. So, and I'd love to hear everybody's stories. So, if they've
I
got a
bet you're
story, I'd
going to
love to
get a
hear
whole
it.
bunch of them, John.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you so much. You're so wonderful. It was great to talk to you today. I'm looking forward to seeing you again, John. Thank you so much. And to everyone else, this is Teresa Aker from Success Diaries with Teresa Aker. I'm so glad you joined us today. I am hoping you're having a wonderful day, and I so look forward to talking to you all soon. Bye-bye now.